It wasn't always bad. I feel like I need to start with that because it's easy to paint things in extremes when you're hurt. Laurel and I had our moments. Moments I clung to when everything started to fall apart. I used to think we were solid. Not perfect, obviously, but good enough to make it through. When we met, Laurel was this radiant, lively woman. She had this laugh that could fill a room, and when she talked, people listened. Not just because she had a lot to say, but because what she said mattered. I was just a guy trying to get his foot in the door of the tech world, barely scraping by on freelance gigs. She believed in me back then, even when I didn't. Fast forward 10 years, and the reality of life had worn us down. The grind of building my startup consumed me. I'll admit, I wasn't the easiest person to live with. Late nights at the computer, the endless stress of trying to secure funding, the obsessive focus. I let it take over. I thought I was doing it for us, for our future. But I guess in her eyes, I was just absent. Laurel's days were repetitive. She'd always been the kind of person who thrived on connection, on being noticed and appreciated. And I wasn't giving her that. I'd come home late, tired and distracted. I'd mutter something like, "Hey," maybe kiss her on the forehead if I remembered. Most nights, she'd already have dinner waiting, though I barely noticed. I just wanted to get back to work. One night stands out in particular. She had gone all out. My favorite dishes spread out on the table, candles lit, and this effort in her appearance that I hadn't seen in a while. I walked in and barely looked up from my phone. "Thanks, but I'm not hungry," I said. I didn't even realize what I'd done until I heard the clink of her fork hitting her plate as she cleaned up in silence. I'd like to say that was the wake-up call, but it wasn't. It was just another night. Around that time, Laurel started spending more time with Dana, her best friend. Dana was one of those people who was always up to something. She had a way of nudging Laurel toward ideas she wouldn't have considered on her own. One of those ideas was Instagram. I remember hearing them talk about it one afternoon while I was coding in the other room. "You should try it," Dana was saying. "It's fun. You're good with photos. Plus, it's a nice distraction." I didn't think much of it. Honestly, it sounded harmless. Laurel deserved something for herself. And if snapping pictures of flowers or whatever made her happy, why not? She started posting a lot. Not just random pictures, but polished ones, the kind that made you think she'd spend hours editing them. I noticed her phone was always in her hand, her focus locked on the screen. She started getting comments, likes, and followers. One name kept popping up, Rivera. At first, it didn't bother me. He was just some guy leaving flattering comments like "stunning shot" or "you have an incredible eye for detail." It seemed innocent, even supportive. But it wasn't long before I noticed her tone changing whenever his name came up in passing. "He's just really interesting," she told me once when I asked about him. "He travels a lot and knows so much about photography." I should have pushed harder, but I didn't. I had deadlines, meetings, and code that wouldn't write itself. I figured she'd found someone to talk to about her hobby. Nothing wrong with that, right? Then the little thing started. Laurel became more guarded with her phone, angling the screen away when I walked by or locking it the second I entered the room. She started dressing differently when she went out. Nicer clothes, new perfume I didn't recognize. When I asked where she was going, she'd brush it off. "Just meeting Dana," she'd say with a quick smile. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I even did for a while. But there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake, this quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering that something wasn't right. One night, I came home to find her on the couch, her phone in her lap, and this strange look on her face. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, fine," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just a rough patch we needed to work through. But deep down, I knew the Laurel I'd come home to wasn't the same woman I'd fallen in love with. That's when I started paying attention, really paying attention. And what I found changed everything. I should have trusted my gut. The signs were there, subtle at first, but growing louder every day. Laurel had changed in ways I couldn't ignore. She wasn't just busy with friends or exploring new hobbies anymore. She was different. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It started with the perfume. I noticed it one morning as she was leaving the house, her usual routine slightly off. She'd lingered in front of the mirror, spritzing herself with a bottle I didn't recognize. It was light and floral, not the kind of scent she used to wear. "You smell nice," I said, half smiling, trying to read her reaction. She glanced at me briefly, then back at the mirror. "Thanks. Dana recommended it." Dana. The name came up a lot lately, like a shield she could throw up any time I questioned where she'd been or what she was doing. Girls' nights and shopping trips seemed to be her go-to explanations. "Where are you off to this time?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Dana and I are trying this new wine bar," she said, slipping on her shoes. She smiled, but it felt forced, like a mask she wore to keep me from asking more. "Another girls' night?" I asked, trying to sound lighthearted, though my stomach churned. "Yeah," she said, already halfway out the door. "Don't wait up." I stared at the closed door for a long time, the unease creeping up my spine. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she brushed me off so easily made it hard to ignore the growing distance between us. The phone thing didn't help. She used to leave it lying around the house, sometimes forgetting it entirely when we went out. But now, it was glued to her hand. And it wasn't just that. She started placing it face down on every surface, like she was afraid of what might pop up on the screen. The first time I asked about it, she laughed it off. "Oh, come on, Elias. Everyone does that. It's just a habit." But it wasn't just a habit. It was a wall, and every time she flipped her phone over, it felt like she was shutting me out of a part of her life I wasn't allowed to see. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My hands itched to pick it up, to go through it and find the answers to the questions that were slowly eating me alive. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I decided to take a different approach. I'd read about tracking apps online, how easy they were to install if you had access to someone's phone. It felt wrong, violating even, but the nagging suspicion wouldn't let me rest. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I installed the app. The first few days didn't reveal much. Her locations matched the places she said she'd been. Cafes, boutiques, Dana's house. I almost convinced myself I'd been paranoid. But then one evening, the app pinged her location. She wasn't at the wine bar she'd mentioned earlier. She was at a hotel. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, the little blinking dot mocking me. My first instinct was to call her, to demand an explanation. But I stopped myself. No, I needed to see this for myself. I grabbed my keys and drove there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The hotel wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity. When I pulled into the parking lot, I scanned the entrance, unsure of what I was even looking for. And then I saw her. Laurel. She was in the lobby, laughing at something the man next to her had said. It was him, Rivera. I recognized him from the comments on her Instagram, the name that had become a constant presence in our lives without my permission. He was taller than I expected, with a confident air that made my blood boil. I stayed in the car, gripping my phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I took a photo of them through the windshield, my heart pounding as I watched her lean in closer to him, her smile brighter than it had been in months. When they walked toward the elevator together, I felt something inside me shatter. But I didn't go in. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I went home, my mind racing. I needed more than just a blurry photo through a windshield. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. The next day, while she was out, I accessed her Instagram account through our shared Wi-Fi. It wasn't hard. She'd left it logged in on the home computer. What I found made my stomach turn. Their conversations were all there, the evidence laid out like a trail of breadcrumbs. It started innocent enough, comments on her photos, shared travel tips, but it quickly became something else. The messages were flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes and plans to meet. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I saved them to a folder on my desktop. I even found photos they'd sent each other, selfies, snapshots from their outings. It was all there, every lie she'd told me laid bare. That night, when Laurel came home, I was waiting for her. She walked in, her usual fake smile plastered on her face. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down on the counter. "What's for dinner?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my mind already formulating what I'd do next. She paused, her smile faltering under the weight of my silence. Elias? What's wrong? I shook my head, forcing a cold smile. Nothing. Just thinking about how things are going to change. She tilted her head, confused, but I didn't elaborate. Let her wonder. She had no idea what was coming. The realization that Laurel had betrayed me wasn't something I wanted to accept quickly. There's a strange, masochistic part of you that tries to find excuses, to rationalize what you've seen, heard, and read. But there was no excusing this. She had lied to my face, repeatedly, and now it was time to face the truth. After days of staring at the evidence, photos of her with Rivera, screenshots of their conversations, even videos of their calls, I felt something I hadn't expected: clarity. There was no saving this marriage, no reconciliation. What was left for me now wasn't about salvaging what we had. It was about taking back my dignity, and I knew exactly how to do it. The idea came to me in the dead of night, staring at the ceiling as Laurel slept soundly beside me. She had no idea what was coming, no clue that I'd already decided how this would end. The first step was setting the stage. I told her I wanted to celebrate the success of my startup, a little dinner to thank everyone who had supported me along the way. She looked surprised at first, probably because I rarely showed interest in hosting anything, but she quickly agreed. That sounds great, she said, smiling in that sweet, practiced way of hers. We could use a little fun. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Yeah, fun? I booked a private dining room at a nice restaurant in the city. The guest list included her parents, her best friend Dana, a few of my colleagues, and a handful of mutual friends. Laurel had no reason to suspect anything. As the date approached, I made sure everything was ready. The restaurant staff helped me set up the screen and projector, and I tested the presentation multiple times to ensure there wouldn't be any glitches. The folder I'd compiled with all the evidence, photos, screenshots, everything, was neatly organized and ready to go. The night of the dinner, Laurel dressed up beautifully. She wore a black dress that I'd always loved on her, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia. But it wasn't enough to make me change my mind. "Do I look okay?" she asked, twirling slightly. "Perfect," I said, forcing a smile. The dinner started off smoothly. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter as everyone mingled and enjoyed the appetizers. Laurel was in her element, chatting and laughing with her parents and friends. She had no idea what was about to hit her. When the main course was served, I stood up, raising my glass for a toast. "First of all," I began, my voice steady, "thank you all for being here tonight. This is a special occasion, and I wanted to share it with the people who matter most." Laurel beamed at me from her seat, completely oblivious. As many of you know, building this startup hasn't been easy. It's taken a lot of late nights, hard work, and sacrifice. I paused, letting the word sacrifice hang in the air, and I couldn't have done it without support. I glanced at Laurel, who smiled back, clearly expecting some kind of heartfelt acknowledgement. But support isn't just about being there during the good times, I continued. It's about trust. It's about partnership. It's about loyalty. The room grew quieter as my tone shifted. Laurel's smile faltered, and I could see the unease creeping into her expression. And when that trust is broken, I said, it's devastating. But sometimes it's also necessary to see the truth, to move forward. I turned toward the screen, picking up the remote. "So tonight, I want to share something with all of you." Laurel's eyes widened as the first image appeared on the screen, a photo of her with Rivera in the hotel lobby. "What is this?" she said, her voice trembling. I ignored her, clicking to the next slide, a screenshot of their Instagram messages. Gasps rippled through the room as the conversation unfolded on screen. Her flirtatious messages and Rivera's responses laid bare for everyone to see. "Elias, stop," Laurel said, standing up, her voice breaking. "No," I said, my tone ice cold. "You don't get to ask me to stop. You've already done enough." Her parents sat frozen in shock, her mother's hand covering her mouth. Dana stammered something about how this wasn't the right place for this, but I cut her off. "This is exactly the right place," I said sharply. "You all deserve to know the truth." By the time I finished the presentation, Laurel was in tears, her carefully crafted facade completely shattered. "This isn't just the end of this dinner," I said, looking directly at her. "It's the end of our marriage. I walked out before she could respond, leaving her to face the fallout with everyone else. The divorce was quick and brutal. I'd planned everything meticulously, transferring all the mortgage debt to her name before we filed. By the time the papers were signed, she was left with nothing but mounting financial problems. I heard through mutual friends that she stayed with Rivera for a while, until she found out he was a fraud who preyed on women for money. By then, she'd lost her apartment and had to move back in with her parents. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work. With no distractions and a renewed sense of purpose, my startup finally took off. I sold our shared assets, reinvested the money, and watched as everything I'd worked for finally paid off. It was during one of my rare breaks at a cafe that I met Hazel. She was a designer who'd been through her own messy breakup, and we connected instantly. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, like I wasn't just surviving but living. As for Laurel, I don't know what became of her after that. I stopped checking, stopped caring. She made her choices, and I made mine. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. If anything, it taught me what really matters. True happiness isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about finding someone who values you, even in the mundane.